so happy that we're actually doing this in person, even though we are Zooming Norbert in. So Zoom has given us kind of this opportunity because, as some of you know, typically, for the lecture series, we take advantage of people who are maybe in the country because we can't fly them over. But this actually now makes it possible to have Norbert with us because, in fact, he is in Berlin. But I'll get to this in a minute. I just want to remind all of you that the next lecture coming up is on November 4th. And also remind some of you who were here for the lecture number 1. This is a series of lectures, which is part of a theme, inclusion. And so we are actually getting speakers from a variety of different perspectives here. Today, we'll be learning a lot about plants. And we are, in fact, really, really lucky to have Norbert Kühn join us from Berlin, as I just said, in Germany, where it is now midnight. So a special thanks for joining us. And as I heard just now, he has spent 8 hours on a train traveling from Switzerland back to his home in Berlin because he was at another plant-related event earlier this week. Norbert Kühn is professor and head of the Department of Vegetation Technology and Planting Design at the Technical University of Berlin, where he joined the faculty in 1998. And in fact, I had the pleasure actually meeting him, I guess, some years after that, in 2001, if I recall correctly. So he studied landscape ecology and landscape architecture at the Technical University of Munich, Weihenstephan, followed by a doctorate at the chair of vegetation ecology on the topic of renaturation of species-poor meadows. He serves on several national and international committees and advisory boards, and from 2006 until 2016 was chairman of the Karl Förster Foundation, which is a very important foundation in the realm of horticulture and also garden design in Germany. So for those of you who are not that familiar with horticulture and perennials, for instance, Karl Förster was a plant breeder in Germany who is also, however, known abroad for many of his cultivars, for example, the feather reedgrass Karl Förster, named after him. Norbert's main work focuses on the theory of planting design, extensive use of perennials, design with spontaneous vegetation, green space management, historical planting design, and trees during climate change. And in fact, I regularly assign some of his articles in courses I teach, and so I'm really very excited that we all get to hear from you directly tonight, Norbert, about some of the most recent work you've been doing, which is related to working with spontaneous vegetation and changing climate. And that's what we're going to be hearing tonight. So please join me in welcoming Norbert Kühn. And we are going to just dim the lights. And so the floor is all yours, Norbert.
Thank you so much, Sonja. I hope you can understand me.
Yes, absolutely. We hear you very well.
Perfect. Okay, congratulations to the techniques. So hello to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to that lecture. I'm feeling very proud to be invited to you in the state. It's a very new experience for me to do a lecture at midnight, but yes, it got also dark in your room, I see.
So we're not going to sleep. Everybody's here is super attentive, I can assure you.
Okay, wonderful. So I try to share my screen and hopefully it works. My title of my lecture is Working with Spontaneous Vegetation in a Changing Climate. It's something I deal with since I began in 20, 30 years ago, and it's an ongoing issue in my work to work about spontaneous vegetation. I will begin with some ideas about the Anthropocene and then come to the spontaneous vegetation that responds to changing climate conditions. I will tell something about neophytes and invasive species and how spontaneous vegetation is accepted in different countries, or depends on how it is, how you work on it. So I will do something about designing with spontaneous vegetation, and will show you one example, one recent example from Germany, from Berlin, which I appreciate very much. That's the so-called Gleisdreieck Park, and where you can see some of these design principles I want to show you. So dealing with the Anthropocene, I'm sure you know the term Anthropocene. It's defined as an epoch, unofficial interval of geologic time, making up the third worldwide division of the Quaternary period, characterized as a time in which the collective activities of human beings began to substantially alter Earth's surface, atmosphere, oceans, and systems of nutrient cycling. So the term is not absolutely clear so far, and it's not clear that we really can use it, but it is very interesting for us, especially as planners, as designers, to deal with this term, because it gets up a very close feeling to main issues from an environmental point we have, but this climate change, effects of globalization, urbanization, and land use, and loss of biological diversity, that's all part of the idea what happens in the Anthropocene under the human influence. My colleague Martin Brominski tried to introduce the term Anthropocene into the landscape design, and he says that the notion of Anthropocene calls for a change in our understanding of nature, implying that the human influence has reached every corner of the world and beyond. And he means that new ideas are necessary for a unitary concept of nature and culture to replace the outdated dualistic understanding. And he has some nice pictures in his paper where he shows us how he means that new concept. That's the traditional concept of culture, where the man stands beside of nature, and that's the new idea of the Anthropocene, where man is part of a network, that people are responsible not only for themselves, for the human beings, but also for the animals, for the plants, and even for the stones and for the sea. And that's a picture I want to show you. That's a nature experience area in the Gleisdreieck Park. And that's a kind of symbol for me, how that might work, that people, that the citizens in a town try to not only to understand nature, but to deal with nature and to be part of nature. And perhaps that can be one possibility to create that issue. So I want to tell you about designing of urban nature, and I'm using the example of spontaneous vegetation, and I would like to show how a change in perspectives can also lead to a change in the perception and of environment and of its design. First of all, we look at the spontaneous vegetation and how it responds to changing environmental conditions. That's just a very normal situations in every town. It doesn't depend where it is. And wherever we go, wherever we see, there is spontaneous vegetation, because plants come everywhere and they try to grow everywhere. And so in different kinds, in different situations, we have vegetation. It can be very different. The manifestation of spontaneous vegetation can change greatly, and it depends on the site, of course. It depends on the plants which here arrive at that place, and it depends, of course, on the stage and succession. So spontaneous vegetation can look like that. It's a pioneer vegetation. You have a lot of open soil, open surfaces, and you have only less plants. It can look like that, very vigorous, with perennials and biennials. It can look like that, a very dense stand of different plants of here Solidago, which is a neophyte to Germany, and Tanacetum. Or it can, of course, can be a woodland succession with a lot of woody plants, like here oaks and Elaeagnus, which come together here in a very specific way. We will talk about that. We call this new ecosystem a novel ecosystem. We have also, of course, area sites which are in between 50, 60 years old, and there we have also a succession of spontaneous vegetation. You can see here Robinia pseudoacacia, for example. That's a species that is introduced to Europe. It isn't native here, and so it got part not only of cultivated land but also of spontaneous situations. What's really interesting is that spontaneous vegetation, vegetation communities, or what is when the plants come together, is of high diversity. I often demonstrate that when I'm doing a tour with my students to Südgelände, which is a park. It's full of spontaneous vegetation, and I show them how many different woody species, how many trees live there from very different origins. So we have some native trees in the urban vegetation. You have more or less 70% of native species. So we have also native trees, but we have also, of course, exotic trees from the urban surroundings, from parks or gardens, which are very close to this place. We have cultivars and garden types which are not natural, which come from nurseries and were selected in nurseries. And we have fruit trees and shrubs, and all these different kinds of plants come together to in these situations. And so it's not only different plants, it's also from different origins. You see here the tree of gods from Asia, you see Robinia from North America, you see a European birch, or you see Senecio that comes from South Africa, and all they come together in that situations. That's why that kind of nature, you can't compare it to other nature types. And that's theory my good colleague Ingo Kovarik did, and he said there are 4 kinds of natures: the real nature, the agrarian landscape, designed urban nature, but there's also a novel nature, a novel urban ecosystem, and that is when all these plants come together spontaneously and create situation we have never had before. And of course, they create these situations because not only they can come together, because also of the side factors we have there in that situations. So we call them novel ecosystems, and novel ecosystem results when species occur in combinations and relative abundance that have not occurred previously within a given biome. Also, it's not, you don't have these things before. Key characters are novelty in the form of new species, a potential for changes in ecosystem functioning, and human agency, in that these ecosystems are the result of deliberate and inadvertent human actions. And so in lots of different situations all over the world, we got in between these so-called novel ecosystems. You can see them all over. You have to just to open your eyes. What can we do, or what is so special about it, and what is the chance of novel ecosystems? The first thing is that we can predict by looking at them, we can predict the performance of plants under future conditions, because all these plants are growing not under the conditions they have in urban situations, under the conditions they got by human activities. And so we can see how these activities, how these situations are responding in the plants, and how the plants are responding to that, and how these future conditions will show up. The wonderful thing about is that novel ecosystems show a way into the future, because they have no other chance. They react as they can. There are natural processes that work, and so they show how the future might be, not like social, economic, or the political ideas which remain in transition. Now, what's the problem about spontaneous vegetation? The problem for a lot of people is that they consist also of neophytes and also of invasive species. It doesn't come by chance, of course. It comes because we imported a lot of these plants, and especially we in landscape architecture had a tradition to import plants. Here you see a citation from the 19th century from Skell. Might be, you know, this landscape architect. He did the English Garden in Munich. And about him, there is written, North America opened its horn of plenty also for us. And the artist took a lot of flowers into his gardens out of this possibilities. And so we had a diversity of imported plants, and all these landscape gardens in the 19th and 20th century show this diversity. But we are still working on importing of plants. Here, for example, that's from our try field. We tried to install prairies. Why did we do that? Because we thought prairies are living under very extreme conditions. And with climate change, we also get more and more extreme conditions. And perhaps that these plants that live in the center of North America can help us in the future to create sustainable plant communities in our situation. But of course, some plants work too well, and plants who work too well get invasive. And that's one of these garden plants that got invasive. Impatiens candelifera from Asia. It's a nice plant, has nice flowers, and that is the reason why it was imported and why it was planted into the European gardens. So mostly we try to get rid of these plants, especially for invasive plants, because invasive plants might injure the native ecosystems, the native diversity, and so we have create some strategies to get rid of this plant. These are, for example, blacklists. It's a blacklist that is done by the EU to show how dangerous the plants are, how they threaten biodiversity, and perhaps how we can manage these plants. The problem is, but obviously highly complex, because most of the plants don't have so much influence. Most of the important plants don't have so much influence on biological diversity. And of course, we are now in a situation, we started with the Anthropocene, but we changed our environment. So the plants are not the reason of a change, but they are the reaction of a change. And so the plants come because we change the environment and not the opposite. In Europe, we have, I think, not really so much problems with invasive species. So far, we have not lost any native species by competition through invasive species. But of course, we have changes, and these changes are part of the changes we have in the Anthropocene. But of course, there is not only the scientific look at these issue. Of course, there's also some prejudgment because native and no native, of course, are terms that are not only used in a biological subject, but also used in different other kinds of political discussions. And so it's hard to argue sometimes because you don't know what really is the problem. Is it really dangerous? How dangerous is it? And how can you deal with it, and how can you manage with it? When it comes to explain vegetation and to explain flora and how it went through the centuries, you have to say that the flora of an area does not stand still, and it never stood still. It's of course, there is development of new species, and there is also an extinction of some other species, and it was before, and it will be in the future. And so you have to have a more dynamic view on these things than before. And the second, of course, is that humans themselves have created the best conditions for an increasing dynamization and the environment through climate change, globalization, and plant trade. And so alien species will influence and further change in ecology in their homeland, of course. But we created the conditions just for that change, and we can't do that back. So exotic plants are not only a threat for biodiversity. When we look at them, they also open up new possibility, especially for future needs. When you look at some of these invasive species or some of these exotic species, we see that we have a lot of so-called future trees or future plants in between that. These are plants, we think that they are really well adapted to heat and drought, and so might be also well adapted to future climate change. So, for example, we have two of these plants we just saw, that as Ailanthus altissima, tree of heaven. It's a tree that comes from China, is very common there, and it's also common in between in Europe, and it withstands central urban situation wonderful. And the second is Robinia pseudoacacia. You know it because it's native to your environment. In Europe, it's an exotic species, and it also can tolerate high temperatures and thrive very well. And then so it's one of the trees we also plant in street situations. So there's a citation I often take when it comes to the questions invasive or non-native species or not, should we use them or not? And Schumann says, if native-only approaches becomes incorporated in regional, national, or international policy documents or legislation, there's a risk that urban ecosystem resilience will be compromised, particularly for urban areas with extreme environmental conditions. So might be we need these plants in the future. And there's a second reason why we need these plants. Here you can see a scenario for the future in Germany. That's the shape of Germany. I hope you can see it here. And you see, in the future with climate change, we will lose a lot of species. You can see up to 60% we will lose. And if they can come into the country, if they can spread, we will gain also species. And there's a turnover of species up from 30 to 70% until the year 2070, 2080. That's really hard to accept that human activity causes such a change in the flora of a country, and might be we need these plants because some of them will, of course, will get extinct. So perhaps it will create also, we just talked about novel ecosystems, and here you see a new interaction that never was before, because you see an American plant, that's Solidago gigantea, and you see a European honeybee, and obviously they fit perfectly together. So we hope, of course, that this development will also cause new interactions between plant, animals, humans, stones, and soil. Yes, back to the spontaneous vegetation. Dealing with spontaneous vegetation also means, of course, that the people we design for have to accept that kind of vegetation. And in Europe, we have, of course, a special development in the last 50 years since the environmental crisis in 1970, that ecologists and ecological planners, had a look at that spontaneous vegetation, and also some of landscape architects, or like Leroy, he's an artist, and he said it is more advisable to begin with a vegetation that grows spontaneously during construction than to destroy this vegetation or to replace it with grass. And he goes further, and he says something we don't want to hear as designers, but he says, by using nature's regulating mechanism, we will show that unlessness of any system that when grouping plants assumes that color provides the right information on how to arrange group of plants. What is true for color is also true for all other static elements. So he says, he's an artist, and he says, might be designing is not the right answer for the environmental questions, and it's the regulation mechanism of ecosystem that might be the right answer. And when you look at his works, for example, here the Eco Cathedral at Middam, it looks very crazy of a kind. It's like you go for in Middle America through ruins of indigenous people, works of indigenous people, and in between there's a lot of vegetation, and it's like a jungle, and it doesn't has any real rule or design aspects or something like that, but it's nevertheless it's fascinating to go through this kind of design. Later, landscape architects like Peter Latz took this idea of dealing with spontaneous vegetation, and he did it together with brown fields that appear in a lot of situations after industrial and post-industrial areas. So you might know some of these parks. They got very famous when he started not to redesign parks, but to take different elements of the parks and to show people how the history of a park was, and to take the spontaneous vegetation and to let it there and be part of a park design. This is Landschaftspark Duisburg Nord. Here you can see the big industrial buildings, and there's a large area which is only covered by that kind of spontaneous vegetation. Or here another place, Zeche Zollverein, which also has that section. So the perception of abundant white vegetation in city differs from cultural background, of course, and education. So not everyone can really appreciate this kind of vegetation. So it depends a kind of where you come from and what experience you did with that. In some European cities, of course, that has in between become part of the idea of nature. And especially when Becker says the concept of urban nature follows the urban rural lifestyle of Berlin. So it in between got part of that spontaneous vegetation, got part of that idea of nature. I want to tell you a very short story about Philadelphia. I don't have so many connections to Philadelphia, but I have a friend and she lived in Philadelphia. She's now living in Italy, and she told me I should recommend her a tree for her house in Italy. And I love Paulownia, this wonderful tree, and I said that's a wonderful tree and it will grow wonderful also in Italy. And she said, no way, that she couldn't stand that tree, because she said in Philadelphia it's a typical tree for abundant situations in the town. And when she saw Paulownia growing in a tree, she felt danger. And so she made a totally different experience with a tree than I had, because of the wonderful flowers. I love that tree so much. And she said, no, it's part of these, or it's seen in these parts of a town where, yeah, might be a dangerous situation might occur. When you get back to Berlin, you see investigation by my colleague Ingo Kowarek, and just have a look at the lower part. You see here a situation with high biodiversity and with a lot of spontaneous vegetation and with no biodiversities, and you see that people here in Europe in between love a situation with high biodiversity and with abundant, with lots of spontaneous vegetation more than the cleared situation that we have on the right-hand side. But you can't say that in for all the countries in the world. Here we have another paper and from China, and she did investigations on the acceptance of spontaneous vegetation in Chinese cities, and she saw that it really depends on the education of people, that the professionals better recognize the value of spontaneous vegetation compared to non-professional. And back to the States, I show you the High Line. Of course, you know the High Line, and the High Line, of course, plays with spontaneous vegetation, but especially in the first parts of the High Line, there's no spontaneous vegetation left. And you see, it looks like that's Sporopolus, that's a grass, that's a prairie grass. It looks like that it was planted, that it came up here spontaneously, but it did not. So there's a kind of approach to make it look like, but what really happened is that all these things planted. And here another paper from the States. I was once interviewed by Nate Berg, and she wrote an article, and she wanted to make spontaneous vegetation more common, or designing with spontaneous vegetation more common. So how can you design with spontaneous vegetation? first, the advantages of spontaneous vegetation. There are some advantages. It occurs at no financial cost. That means it occurs for itself and that you have nothing to plant. That's of course an advantage. It's authentic. That's something that Peter Lutz uses for his parks in the Emscher situation, that he said that to the old ruins of an industrial place, it of course fits, but because it's authentic and it's also tells you something about the history of a place, not only the ruins and the buildings tell you something, also the plants tell you something about the place. Then it's appropriate to the site conditions because it chooses itself whether it grows or not at that site, and so you don't have to think about, is it appropriate or is it not. It just lives there, it just occurs there, it just got established there. And of course it brings back a kind of nature, the urban nature to a city. Of course you have to accept it, but it's not the nature you have outside the city, but it's the city that makes it's the nature that makes the city more and more. And so of course you have a lot of these spontaneous vegetation inside the city. The problem of course is that it does not offer the same aesthetic values than traditional planters, and people of course are used to these values. And Lee said that she got from her people that they really appreciate these values and they miss it when they see at spontaneous vegetation, at spontaneous plants. And so sometimes to begin with and to get more reactions from the people, it's of course good to have some strategies to work with spontaneous vegetation. So one is to support plants which provide mass display. So try to play the flower card. That's one thing you can do to get more acceptance. Of course, you can also add some other plants which people might be used to, which people might know, and so they get a better understanding of a planting. Or what's often very important, to promote a longer flower season, because some of plants of spontaneous plants only bloom in summer or late summer or something like that. And for example, when you add bulbs, you have also a flower display in early in the year, and so might be you have a better acceptance to that thing. But last thing, and that's the thing that's landscape architecture design is contrasting spontaneous vegetation to its environment. There's an article, Messy Ecosystem, Orderly Frames, and that of course helps you. That's something we did. We added some ornamental plants. That's spontaneous vegetation, and it's not really attractive to the people, and so we added something of that, and we showed how it works, of course, because you add something into a existing plant community, in a novel plant community, of course, but it's still you have still competition there, and so you try to make it sometimes more attractive. For example, to add some plants like salvias, which bloom much more earlier than the rest of the solidago that belong to the spontaneous vegetation. Of course, you can try to do it on a on a bigger scale to implement some landscape architecture design. And the best thing, of course, is to design orderly frames. That's an article by Nassauer, maybe you know it. I love it very much. He doesn't talk about spontaneous vegetation, but he talks about vegetation people are not used to, more natural vegetation that is not their typical idea of a bedding plant situation. And he tries to show how designing helps for that situations to get accepted by people. Last thing, I show you one example I love very much. That's a recent park in Berlin, Park am Gleisdreieck. That's a design opened 2011. The first parts, the second parts were open 2015, and they are still working on some parts of the park. And it's in the very center of Berlin, and you see it consists of two different parts. And in that park, you will find all these things that parks normally have. You have sports and recreation areas.
Norbert, we cannot hear you. Can you, if you come to the screen a little bit further? Yes, this is good. This is good.
Okay. Okay, is this better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. So you have in that parks the typical situations you have in every park, sports and recreation areas. We have community gardens there, and we also have some ornamental plantings. That's not the typical ornamental plantings, that's perennial planting with low maintenance. But I think that's not hard to accept for the people. But we have also spontaneous vegetation, and I think the spontaneous vegetation in that parks really helps to create quality and gives a place an authentic atmosphere and supports also the resilience of the park. For example, here are remnants of spontaneously grown woodlands. You see, of course, the Binia pseudoacacia. And you see that they create a space, that they create shade, that they are 20, 30 years old, and of course they help to have ecosystem services for the people, especially in summer. Or you can see here gravel fields with enhanced spontaneous vegetation. This looks a little bit weird in that situation, but the first idea was to have a habitat for a certain beetle. I don't know whether the beetle is still there or not, but it makes a more diverse situation to the place. And you see the gravel field is framed here by pathways, and so people love these situations. Or the third situation that is also created by spontaneous vegetation is that woodland area where a former rail track goes through, and yes, you see people use them for jogging or for walking. And it's not only good for the biodiversity or for the urban nature, it's also wonderful to have an atmosphere that belongs to the place and that's authentic for that situations. So I come to a conclusion, and my conclusions are that spontaneous vegetation within novel ecosystems is a result of an overall human influence of the environment. So it is our nature. It's a nature we created, and therefore we have to respect it as human beings of an Anthropocene. It's still a nature that is full of life, it is valuable, and it's a nature that people appreciate more and more. The species are highly adapted to also to future challenges because they come out of that process of the Anthropocene. And some of them may also help us to survive or help us to, because they have ecological services they can provide, and so they help us to withstand certain extreme climate situation. I think many concepts of landscape architectures can make use of this spontaneously growing plants, and so I hope that we more and more understand that we should not get rid of vegetation of a certain situation, but to use it and to use it in a design concept, and to see what advantages it may offer for us and for our future. So thank you very much for listening. Got to the end of my lecture, and yes, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norbert. Can you, okay, that's great. So you can actually, can you see us? Can you see us? Can you hear me?
You mean me?
Yes. Okay. Okay, so it seems to be working.
I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much. I think while people are maybe kind of thinking about some questions, I'm going to just, I have so many questions, but I also have, I'm going to just, I think I do have to make a comment, because as one of the people who's actually working in the environmental humanities, I'm always very interested in what terms, different disciplines use. So, for example, the term exotic species, I was curious, for example, whether that's a term that is very widely used still among ecologists. But besides that, I was struck actually by the European Union's color coding of the black list and the white list. And then I think there was a gray list in between. The black list basically was listing the species that were not wanted or that appeared to be not that dangerous. I think it kind of said, dangerous species, was that it? And then kind of there was a gray list that was somewhere in between, and the white list that was that's kind of what you can plant. And so
there's also a green list.
Sorry?
There's also a green list.
Is there a green list? What is the green list?
The green means that plants you can use all over, but are not dangerous at all.
So that makes it kind of even more intriguing to me, because, as you can probably imagine, I think kind of this color coding brings up some very kind of problematic issues, because, you mentioned kind of xenophobia and the kind of political use of native plants, and what in some instances might actually be stand behind the use of native plants, like this nativism and so forth. And I almost kind of see that represented in the color coding of those lists by the European Union, which they probably did not realize, I'm assuming. Anyhow, so I find that problematic. So while I was kind of saying all this, do we have any questions in the room? Yes, we do. So I'm going to pass the mic, and if you don't mind.
Hello, I'm in the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences, and it sounds from your talk that spontaneous vegetation includes introduced species or non-native species and native species. So in designing for a city, would you argue that we should keep non-native introduced species as opposed to removing them? And does that apply elsewhere beyond the cities? Because I know that environmentalists are like, we always shun introduced non-native species. So
Yes, I absolutely would argue that non-native and native fit together because they, when you, it comes to these novel ecosystem, they come together, and I think they will create new ecosystems and also new a new balance. And my idea is only to protect the process that the plants can develop, and of course you can lead the process in a certain kind of design idea perhaps, but I would not take out any of these plants, neither native or not native, because I think that's the wonderful idea about the urban nature, that the plants come from themselves at that place and come together in new constellations. And I think that's the wonderful thing about that might be a solution for the future, that people or that humans can't create, but can only be created by nature and by the process that nature does during succession, for example.
I'm interested to know how you find clients, or maybe how you convince clients that, you know, new forms of vegetation are what they should do for their project. What arguments might work best for the public?
Okay, I think the best argument, I think it depends, of course, on the clients, and it depends where you work and what your surrounding is. And you know all these things as a landscape architect, that you have to first look out for the situation and for the background. But my best argument would be that you have to, that we create a new urban nature. I think that is the argument I would use first, that this kind of vegetation is something that never had been before, because the plants come together in a new combination, and that makes a very special situation we only have in cities, and we only have through these human influence. And but a lot of animals in between use these situation, and it's like a big experiment that at the moment is going on. And so I would say the clients should, or people here, perhaps I have a very Central European view on that topic, but people in between appreciate when they see these kind of plants or of vegetation. Of course, when people are into flowers and into blooming situation, I would take one of the strategies I mentioned and add more flowers, or try to do more design, more clear design work, so that people can perhaps can see it more as a design work, and have to get closer to that kind of vegetation step by step.
My colleague Sean, come in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kühn. My question is, if you have any clever examples that you have seen where, so I'll give you an example here. If I ever planted an ailanthus tree on a project, I would never get another project again. So but for example, how could you take advantage of the spontaneous nature of plants as a way of, say, encouraging them to grow in areas? Or I guess what I'm asking is there ways to take advantage of the qualities of particular species of plants that could subvert this idea that we clearly can't plant them? Because it seems like in the examples that we saw today, they're either found things on a site or they're things that we plant, as opposed to something that we say foster or encourage, and how that strategy could be part of the design process. And so I'm curious if you've seen any interesting examples, particularly in a place like Germany or in Europe, where that has been done successfully.
I'm not totally sure I got the question. How to start with in a situation where people are not convinced. I think I would start with might not be with a very with a very complicated situation, but with a very easy situation like woodlands, like a succession, and would try to make really a kind of design work out of that woodland situation. I would not start with perennials or biennials or with annual vegetation. I would start with trees, and trees are always a good example. People like trees, they appreciate trees, and also with spontaneous trees, I think you can start and show them that they are there on that side and belong to the side, and might be of better quality or when something you plant. And perhaps then I would continue and to go to other kinds of vegetation. So hopefully, I wasn't sure. Hopefully, it was an answer to your question.
In a way, yes, it's fine.
In a way, yes. Okay, thank you.
I have a kind of segue, maybe, and I'm not sure, maybe. That you showed an image of Hellersdorf in Berlin, where you and your team did some plantings. Was it Hellersdorf or one of the residential areas outside of Berlin?
In Hellersdorf, yeah.
Hellersdorf, right?
Yeah.
Did you maybe use, even though it wasn't trees, but it was actually perennials, I think, that you planted, if I saw correctly? How did the public, how did the residents respond to that planting? And also, was it perhaps somewhat along the lines of what Sean was asking? Basically, this was an experiment, a test site. Is that correct? Yeah. And so basically, was that an attempt also to familiarize citizens and residents with this type of vegetation, or was that not even an issue?
It was really hard, because you might know Hellersdorf. It's in the outskirts of Berlin, and it's very big housing areas. It's not the rich part of the town, and people were not really interested in our trials and in our experiments. And we try to get out how they find it, how they think about that, but we are not really interested in it. We did something with prairie plants. We did something with steppe plants, and the display was not so, yes, not so fantastic. What we also did was with meadow plants. So we also started to establish European meadow plants, and that was interesting. That people, of course, they might know these plants because they were native, and they appreciated it much more than the plants they didn't know. We thought the exotic species like prairie and prairie species were the better ones, but obviously they appreciate more the plants they might know or have a certain idea of. So that was what we got from the people there.
Great, thank you. Miranda has a question.
Thank you, Dr. Kühn. I was interested in the potential for spontaneous planting in agricultural regions, and kind of wondering what attitudes perhaps farmers in Germany have towards your suggestions of spontaneous planting. And also, do you see potential for spontaneous planting as a kind of strategy of land reclamation in agricultural regions, or is there is that problematic?
It's problematic. It's forbidden by law. It's forbidden to use any non-native species outside the city. So normally you can't. Of course, you can use vegetation that is native, but the clue about this novel ecosystem is the coming together of native and non-native. So that's not possible, and I'm not sure if it makes sense. It makes sense, might be for agricultural reason. When you do, for example, you do a, don't know how the English expression is, a shortcut, eine Kurzumtriebsplantage for
That's a kind of typical German word. It actually kind of consists of four at the same time, but kind of a basically short term, or you're cutting.
You're cutting the trees to get wood to burn it every 5 to 10 years. Kind of coppicing. You do kind of coppicing with the trees every 5 or 10 years, and you take the branches and you burn it. That's the idea of such an agricultural use. And for these situation, you can of course use, for example, robinia or something that is growing very well and that makes a lot of biomass. That is one situation. Might be you can use non-native species outside, or for producing biomass. We have, for example, a prairie plant. It's called Silphium, might be, Silphium perfoliatum, and they use it, they grow it on fields and use it for biomass for production. But it's not, of course, it's not a design issue, and it's not an, it's not for ornamental reason. It's just for producing biomass.
Hi, Dr. Ku. I'm seeing your like practical planting plan. Like for example, if you are allocated to a site, and what agency or strategy you will use to trigger the germination of the spontaneous vegetation? Like, will you like plant some plants like plants as the base to like attract other spontaneous vegetation, or like soil fertilizer or something like that? Like, what's your strategy to do that?
Okay, you asked about the technology, how to initiate, to establish vegetation.
Yes.
It depends on the site you have. Normally, you don't need any technology because the vegetation is existing. When it's not existing, of course, you can try to do a plowing so that you get into the soil and there's a seed supply of plants into the soil, and you can try to get to water it afterwards, and then when you get the germination. But normally it's important if you want to add something. For example, I showed you the strategies to have more the ornamental idea, more the design idea, and you want to add something. Then you, of course, have to plant new things. And in our experiments, we saw that planting is the best possibility, not sawing, but planting, because when you saw something, it's hard to see how it germinates and how it develops after 1-2 years. It's really hard to predict how seeds develop. So the better thing is to get plants and to establish new these species as plants when you want to do that.
So you would have to cultivate those plants beforehand and then bring them in, and then you could create really fast, because I think Solomon was concerned, can you somehow facilitate the process so that it actually is faster, the colonization process of the plants?
Okay. That's of course true, but normally spontaneous vegetation develops within 1 year. So because you have early succession situation and then the following situation. So normally that's not so really the problem to wait for these kind of plants.
Thank you. Other questions? No, I think it looks, yeah. Yes, Hassan has a question.
Hello. So I was wondering if you believe that there is value in some areas to try to preserve historic landscape conditions and prevent the growth of spontaneous vegetation, or should it be embraced everywhere?
That's a good question. I think the novel ecosystem will occur all over, in the cities, in the landscape, in every country of the world. So there's no, I think there's no other development. And of course, there are some places with indigenous plants, with native plants, with native plant communities, which are very valuable. We also have them in Germany. And of course, I would love to protect them. I don't know whether you can protect them when all the climate conditions change in the next 50 years. But of course, I'm also a plant lover. I like to go out walking, hiking in the nature. And of course, I don't want to lose these plants. But it will get, my opinion is it will get harder and harder to preserve these situations. But I think we should try to preserve. We can't preserve all these situations, but we can preserve some of these situations. In my opinion, it will be like going into a museum to see something out of the past, to see a picture or whatever you will is preserved from the 19th, 18th, 17th century. And so will be the landscape in 30, 50 years, that some parts can be preserved, but I think the other landscape will change more or less to these novel ecosystems by the climate change and by globalization, by all these issues we face now.
Well, I think that's a good, oh, we do have one more question.
Hi, my question is that many times we are told that it's exotic invasives are not a good thing because they tend to create monocultures, because they destroy all the existing vegetation. So do you think you should let it happen because they are the best adapted, and then maybe new species will come up which will compete with them? Or do we have to consciously try to create competition from like natives or maybe other exotics, or just let whatever has to happen, let it happen?
That's also a good question. There's one strategy in nature protection that's called assisted migration. Assisted migration means you don't wait for plants to come, you introduce plants to come into nature situations. It's dangerous. You know what happened to things that were introduced to other countries. As look at New Zealand or all these island ecosystems where we introduced some things and they did something totally different what we expect. So my idea is just to come and wait. I think to let plants come and wait and to see how these plants will react to the environment. We often have problems with non-native species, with invasive species in monocultures. For example, we have pine trees here in Germany, and we have forests that only consists of pine trees. And when you introduce a plant in these monocultures, they will spread all over, and you have the idea that it's also only a weed that gets through these into these woodlands. But normally when it comes to competition and other plants arrive, and there is time, 10, 20 years, I think a ecosystem will develop, a new ecosystem will develop. And I don't want to play God in that direction. I think we did too many changes in the last time, so I would recommend to wait until other plants come and it gets to a plant society then.
so. Okay, I see. This is actually a really nice ending, because the adventive plant, right? The plant that arrives, that comes and is welcomed. I think this is a good note to end upon. So thank you so much, Norbert Kühn,
Thank
for
you.
joining us tonight. I think it's like, well, it's 1:30 your time. So have a good night. I hope you sleep well. And I think we can, I guess we can send you off to bed. kind of.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. I wish you all the best.